The golden light of the setting sun spilled into Grant Hensley's office, illuminating the room where he sat with unshakable focus. His laptop screen displayed months of credit card statements and bank transfers. Each entry seemed harmless on its own, but together, they painted a picture he couldn't ignore. A husband of 25 years and a father who had worked tirelessly to provide, Grant knew one thing for certain: his instincts were never wrong. $300 at Nordstrom when his wife, Camille, said she was out with her sister. $5,000 withdrawn from their savings with no explanation. Hotel charges for rooms he never stayed in. The spreadsheet he had compiled was damning. Click. The sound of heels on the hardwood floor snapped him out of his thoughts. Camille appeared in the doorway, as stunning as ever, dressed in a new designer outfit that reeked of extravagance. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and carefully applied makeup radiated elegance, but tonight, something about her presence felt off. "Still working, darling?" she asked with a smile that once melted his heart. Now it only fueled his suspicion. "Just going over some statements," Grant replied casually, leaning back in his chair. His calm tone masked the storm brewing within. Camille sauntered in, her perfume lingering in the air as she perched gracefully on the edge of his desk. "You work too hard," she teased, her voice honeyed. "All work and no play makes a dull husband, doesn't it?" Grant's eyes flicked to her, sharp and assessing. For years, he had ignored the small inconsistencies. An unexplained charge here, an odd excuse there. But now, as he noticed the price tag still attached to the hem of her dress, everything began to make sense. "Speaking of work," he said, his voice steady, "I noticed a few charges on the platinum card. Nordstrom, some boutique downtown. Not exactly little things, wouldn't you say?" Camille's laughter was airy, too practiced. "Oh, you know me," she said with a dismissive wave. "Sometimes I lose track of the small stuff." Grant leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. $5,000 isn't exactly small stuff, he said. "That came out of our savings last week. Mind explaining that one?" For the briefest moment, Camille froze. Then, with remarkable composure, she placed a hand on his shoulder, her polished nails gleaming. "That was for Laurel," she said smoothly. "She needed extra money for school. I didn't want to bother you. You've been so busy lately." Grant's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Laurel, their daughter, was in an elite university, her tuition fully covered by his meticulous planning, yet she hadn't mentioned any extra expenses. "That's odd," Grant said, his voice calm but laced with an edge. "I spoke to Laurel last weekend. She didn't mention needing anything extra. In fact, she seemed just fine." Camille's mask slipped for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "You know how thoughtful she is," she said, her voice laced with sweetness. "She didn't want to worry you. College can be so stressful after all." Grant leaned back, his gaze narrowing. "Stressful, huh? Interesting. I'll have to follow up with her tomorrow." For years, Camille had used her charm to sidestep his questions, and for years, Grant had brushed it off. But not tonight. As she stood to leave, tossing a coy smile over her shoulder, Grant noticed her phone buzz in her hand. The name Bryce flashed briefly across the screen, accompanied by a heart emoji. That single moment was all Grant needed. He wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was certain. Camille had underestimated him, but that was about to change. The cracks in her perfect facade were growing, and Grant was determined to break it wide open. The moment Camille left the room, Grant's focus sharpened. He minimized the spreadsheet on his laptop, but kept the browser open, his mind already racing. He wasn't a man who acted without evidence, and tonight he would get it. Years of working in high-stakes negotiations had taught him the importance of patience and precision. He opened their joint bank account online, scrolling through months of transactions. Each line added to the narrative forming in his mind: Nordstrom, expensive restaurants, hotel charges, and frequent ATM withdrawals, always just under the daily limit. The pattern was unmistakable. Grant's fingers moved swiftly, organizing the transactions into categories. He noticed a series of large withdrawals followed by charges for high-end jewelry and boutique stores. On the surface, it could all seem innocent, but Grant knew better. These weren't the habits of a woman managing family expenses. They were the habits of someone hiding something. A new thought struck him. He pulled up the recent credit card statements and cross-referenced them with Camille's calendar. Lunch with her sister? That coincided with a $300 charge at a high-end store. Yoga class? That lined up with an $800 boutique spree. Camille had been lying to him for months, maybe longer. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He needed more than numbers. He needed irrefutable proof. The following day, Grant left home earlier than usual, telling Camille he had a long day at the office. In reality, he parked his car 2 blocks away, hidden behind a row of trees. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of their driveway. Hours ticked by, but Grant's patience never wavered. At exactly 3:45 p.m., a sleek black BMW pulled into the driveway. Grant's jaw tightened as he watched Camille step out of the house, dressed in tight jeans and a low-cut blouse he had never seen before. She looked nothing like the reserved wife she claimed to be. Without hesitation, she climbed into the passenger seat. Through the zoom lens of his phone's camera, Grant captured the moment she leaned over to kiss the driver, a man younger than her by at least a decade. The BMW backed out and merged into traffic, and Grant followed at a safe distance. The car led him to the Grand Hotel downtown, a place he knew well from hosting business clients. Parking across the street, he documented everything. Camille and her companion entering the hotel, the valet parking her car, and even the time-stamped entrance on the security cameras. 3 hours later, when the pair finally emerged, Camille's hand was wrapped around the man's arm. They kissed again before parting ways, her companion in the BMW and Camille back in her own car. Grant's stomach churned, but he kept his emotions in check. When he returned home that evening, Camille was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred a pot of soup. Her designer dress was back, her hair styled as if nothing had happened. "You're home late," she said with a smile, not even turning to look at him. "Long day at the office?" "Very," Grant replied, his voice cool and detached. "Things aren't always what they seem." Her stirring slowed, just for a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said, heading toward the stairs. "I think I'll shower and head to bed early." In their bedroom, Grant began his next move. He retrieved Camille's phone from the nightstand while she remained downstairs. As expected, it was locked, but Grant wasn't deterred. He connected it to his laptop and used a recovery tool to access her messages and call history. It didn't take long to find the name Bryce and a flurry of texts that made his blood run cold. Bryce. "Missing you already. Same time next week?" Camille. "Of course. Can't wait." Grant didn't feel anger or heartbreak, just clarity. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a farce. And if Camille thought she could deceive him, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Grant knew the next step required methodical precision. Camille had spent months, perhaps years, weaving a web of lies. But Grant wasn't just any man. He was a strategist, someone who thrived on uncovering details others overlooked. Now, he would turn that skill against her. The following morning, Grant hired a private investigator. The man, a former detective, wasted no time tracking down the owner of the black BMW. By the end of the day, Grant had a name: Bryce Heller, a real estate agent with a reputation that reeked of scandal. Bryce specializes in high-end properties, the investigator reported, but he's also been tied to 2 divorces in the past 5 years, both involving wealthy married women. He's not just selling houses, he's selling fantasies. Grant absorbed the information with a steely calm. Bryce wasn't just another man. He was a professional manipulator, the kind of man who preyed on women like Camille, vain, entitled, and hungry for excitement. Over the next few days, Grant meticulously pieced together the puzzle. Camille's spending habits aligned perfectly with Bryce's movements. The jewelry purchases, The hotel stays, the large withdrawals, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. Camille wasn't just cheating, she was siphoning money from their joint accounts to fund her affair. The final piece fell into place when Laurel, their daughter, came home for the weekend. Grant was in his study when he heard the front door open and the sound of excited voices. He moved quietly to the top of the stairs, his ears straining to catch their conversation. "Did you tell him about the extra tuition money?" Laurel's voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Of course not, sweetie," Camille replied smoothly. "You know how your father is. He'd only worry. What he doesn't know won't hurt him." Grant's grip tightened on the railing. His suspicions had been confirmed, but this revelation cut deeper than any betrayal by Camille. Laurel, his only child, was complicit in the lies. "And Bryce?" Laurel asked hesitantly. "Does Dad still think he's just a business contact?" "Everything's fine," Camille said quickly, her tone sharp. "Just stick to the story we discussed." Grant descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When he appeared in the foyer, both women froze, their guilty expressions confirming everything he needed to know. "Dad!" Laurel exclaimed, her smile too bright, too forced. "We were just talking about my classes." "Really?" Grant said, his voice steady. "Not about the extra tuition money? Or about Bryce?" The color drained from Laurel's face. Camille stepped forward, her usual charm faltering. "Grant, I can explain—" "Save it," he interrupted coldly. "I've already seen the charges, the messages, and the photos. You've been lying to me, both of you." "Daddy, please," Laurel stammered. "It's not what it looks like." Grant's laugh was bitter. "Not what it looks like? So, you weren't helping your mother cover up an affair? You weren't using my hard-earned money to fund her lifestyle with another man?" Laurel's tears started to flow, but Grant had no sympathy left. "I worked 60-hour weeks to provide for this family. And this is how you repay me?" Turning to Camille, his voice dropped to an icy calm. "Who is Bryce?" "The man you've been sneaking off with. The one you've been using our money to impress?" Camille's practiced mask shattered. "Grant, you've betrayed me," he said, cutting her off. "But more importantly, you've betrayed the life I built for us. There's no coming back from this." Grant wasn't the kind of man to make empty threats. That night, after his confrontation with Camille and Laurel, he sat in his home office, his resolve solidifying with every passing minute. Revenge wouldn't just be about exposing Camille's lies. It would be about ensuring she faced the consequences of her betrayal and taking back control of everything she had tried to steal from him. He began by contacting his lawyer, James Morrison, a trusted ally of 20 years. "James," he said, his voice steady, "I want to freeze all joint accounts. Effective immediately. No exceptions." By the next morning, Camille would discover she had no access to the lavish lifestyle Grant's hard work had funded. But that was just the beginning. Later that week, Grant met with the private investigator, who handed over a comprehensive report on Bryce Heller. It was even worse than Grant had imagined. Bryce wasn't just a manipulator, he was a con artist. 2 divorces in 5 years, the investigator explained, sliding documents across the table. Both women wealthy, both drained of their assets before they even realized what hit them. He uses charm to gain trust, then convinces them to make investments, all of which funnel back to him. Grant flipped through the documents, his jaw tightening. Bryce had a history of fraudulent property deals, offshore accounts, and fake business ventures. This wasn't just about Camille's betrayal. This was a scheme Bryce had perfected over the years. "Send me everything," Grant said. "Every detail. I'm going to make sure he regrets crossing me." The investigator nodded. "I also pulled property records. Bryce and your wife have been looking at multi-million-dollar homes, none of which are in your name. Looks like they plan to drain your accounts, buy the properties, and leave you with nothing." Grant's lips curled into a grim smile. "Not if I get to them first." The execution of the plan. The weekend brought an opportunity Grant couldn't pass up. Camille had arranged for a dinner with Laurel under the guise of family bonding. Grant, of course, had other plans. After excusing himself early with the excuse of a work emergency, he parked a block away from their house and waited. Sure enough, at 3:30 p.m., Bryce's BMW pulled into the driveway. Camille, dressed in another outfit Grant didn't recognize, climbed into the passenger seat. Grant followed them downtown to the Grand Hotel. This time, he didn't just take photos. He walked into the lobby, requesting the manager. Flashing his business card, he explained, "That woman and her companion are using stolen funds. I need access to the security footage for legal purposes." The manager hesitated, but eventually complied. Within minutes, Grant had obtained security footage of Camille and Bryce entering the elevator arm in arm. Combined with the bank statements and Bryce's sordid history, Grant now had an airtight case, setting the stage for exposure. Grant's plan wasn't just to expose Camille's infidelity, but to destroy the carefully curated facade she had built in their social circle. He arranged a private gathering at the prestigious country club where Camille often flaunted her status. Invitations were sent to their closest friends, business associates, and even some of Camille's family. On the day of the event, Grant arrived early, ensuring everything was in place. A projector was set up in the main hall, along with a screen large enough for every guest to see. Camille arrived with Laurel, both dressed to impress. "What's this about, Grant?" Camille asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "You'll see," Grant replied calmly, gesturing for them to sit in the front row. As the room filled with guests, murmurs of curiosity filled the air. Finally, Grant took the stage. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but commanding. "Many of you know my wife, Camille, as a devoted partner and mother. Tonight, you'll see another side of her, a side she's worked very hard to keep hidden." The projector came to life, displaying the first image, a series of bank statements showing massive withdrawals from their joint account. Gasps echoed through the room as Grant methodically laid out the evidence. "This money," he continued, "was not used for our family as Camille claimed. It was spent on hotel stays, jewelry, and secret meetings with this man." The next slide showed a photo of Bryce and Camille kissing in the BMW, followed by the security footage of them entering the Grand Hotel together. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and disapproval. Camille's face drained of color as she turned to Bryce, who had been invited to the event under the guise of a business opportunity. "Bryce," she hissed, "do something." But Bryce, faced with the mounting evidence, could only stammer. "Bryce Heller," Grant announced, "isn't just my wife's lover. He's a con artist who preys on wealthy women, draining their finances under the guise of investment opportunities." To drive the point home, Grant introduced 3 other women, previous victims of Bryce's schemes. Each of them took the stage, recounting how Bryce had manipulated and robbed them. Camille, now visibly shaking, tried to defend herself. "Grant, this isn't what it looks like." Grant turned to face her, his voice cold and unrelenting. "It's exactly what it looks like. And now, everyone knows." The room buzzed with murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Camille sat frozen in her chair, her perfect composure shattered. Laurel, sitting beside her, had tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she stared at the evidence projected onto the screen. Bryce, ever the smooth talker, attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing up and straightening his tie, "this is clearly a misunderstanding. These transactions are all legitimate business dealings." Grant cut him off with a sharp laugh, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Business dealings?" He clicked the projector remote, revealing property records and offshore accounts linked to Bryce's name. "Are these the same legitimate dealings you used to defraud Sarah Peterson, Margaret Wilson, and Elizabeth Drake? Because they look awfully familiar." The 3 women stood, each taking turns recounting how Bryce had conned them out of their savings. Their stories painted a damning portrait of the man Camille had aligned herself with. As the last slide flashed on the screen, a breakdown of every fraudulent transaction tied to Bryce and Camille, Grant turned to his wife. "Do you have anything to say, Camille? Or should I keep going?" Camille stood, her face pale but defiant. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Grant," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, I made mistakes, but everything I did was for our family." "For our family," Grant repeated, his tone icy. Was sneaking off to the Grand Hotel with Bryce for our family? Was draining $300,000 from our accounts for our family? Or was it all just for yourself? The room fell silent as Camille faltered. Even Laurel, who had defended her mother just days ago, looked at her with disbelief. Public humiliation. Grant took a step closer to Camille, his voice calm but cutting. "Let me make one thing clear. You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage, our family, and everything I worked for. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Turning back to the audience, Grant continued. "Effective immediately, all joint accounts are frozen. Divorce proceedings have been initiated, and Camille will receive nothing. Every dollar she took has been accounted for, and restitution will be pursued through legal channels." Camille's voice broke. "You can't do this, Grant. We've been married for 25 years. I've given you everything." Grant's laugh was cold. "Everything? The only thing you've given me is betrayal. And as for the money you and Bryce thought you could steal." He clicked to the final slide, showing documents that placed all their properties and investments in a trust under Grant's sole control. "You own nothing, Camille. Every asset is protected. You thought you could destroy me, but I've built my life on integrity and hard work. You can't take that away." Laurel faces the truth. Laurel's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Dad, I didn't know it was like this. Mom said it wasn't hurting anyone." Grant turned to his daughter, his expression softening for a moment. "Laurel, you chose to believe her lies. You helped her cover up the truth. You used my trust to manipulate me. Actions have consequences." Tears streamed down Laurel's face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." "Please, I'll do anything to make it right." Grant shook his head. "The only thing you can do now is learn. From this moment on, you're on your own. Your tuition is paid for this semester. After that, you'll have to figure it out like everyone else." "Dad, please don't do this," Laurel pleaded, but Grant's resolve was unshakable. "You made your choices, Laurel. Now you'll face the consequences." Bryce's reckoning. As security escorted Bryce toward the exit, Grant delivered his final blow. "By the way, Bryce, I've already forwarded all of this evidence to the authorities. Your history of fraud won't go unnoticed anymore. Enjoy explaining yourself in court." Bryce's confident facade crumbled as the weight of his actions caught up to him. For the first time, he realized he had underestimated his opponent. The aftermath. The event ended with Camille and Laurel leaving in silence, their social standing shattered. Friends turned their backs on them, whispering about the scandal that would follow them for years. Grant, however, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced betrayal head-on and emerged victorious. Over the following weeks, Camille struggled to adjust to her new reality. Without access to Grant's resources, she was forced to take a job at a department store, her designer wardrobe a distant memory. Laurel juggled 2 part-time jobs to cover her expenses, her once privileged life replaced with harsh lessons in responsibility. Grant, meanwhile, thrived. He moved into a sleek penthouse overlooking the city and refocused his energy on his business. The betrayal had cost him dearly, but it had also reminded him of his strength. Standing by the window one evening, scotch in hand, he reflected on everything he had lost and gained. The price of betrayal had been high, but Grant had emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Months passed, and Grant Hensley had fully embraced his new life. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they became a reminder of his resilience and strength. Camille and Laurel, once integral to his world, were now mere echoes of his past. Grant's divorce finalized without a hitch, thanks to the meticulous evidence he had gathered. Camille received nothing. No alimony, no property, not even a car. Bryce's schemes were exposed in court, thanks to Grant's collaboration with his private investigator and the other victims. The conman was now facing multiple fraud charges, his charm no longer able to save him. Camille's new reality. Camille's life took a sharp turn after the public humiliation. With her designer clothes sold off to pay legal bills and her friends distancing themselves from the scandal, she was left to fend for herself. Gone were the luxurious spa days and shopping sprees. Now she stood behind a makeup counter at Nordstrom, serving customers in the very store where she once spent thousands. Her colleagues whispered about her fall from grace, and her once loyal friends avoided her in public. Camille's smile, once so polished and perfect, now felt like a hollow mask as she struggled to maintain her dignity. Laurel's harsh lessons. For Laurel, life was equally unforgiving. The credit cards were gone, the luxury car sold, and her days now revolved around balancing two part-time jobs. She worked mornings at a diner and evenings at a coffee shop, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes and her feet aching from long shifts. The first few weeks were the hardest, but over time, something began to shift. Laurel's entitled attitude gave way to humility as she realized the depth of her mistakes. She wrote letters to Grant, apologizing and asking for forgiveness, but he never responded. She had to learn to stand on her own, a lesson Grant knew she needed. Grant's triumph. Grant's life flourished. Moving into his sleek penthouse downtown, he poured his energy into expanding his business empire. Free from the burdens of deceit and manipulation, he found a renewed sense of purpose. His work thrived, and he even began to reconnect with old friends who admired the way he had handled the scandal with strength and dignity. One evening, as Grant sipped scotch by the window, his phone buzzed with a message from James Morrison, his lawyer. Bryce Heller just pled guilty to multiple fraud charges, sentencing next month. Looks like justice is on your side. Grant allowed himself a rare smile. Justice wasn't just on his side. It had been served cold and decisive, exactly as he intended. A final letter. A week later, Grant received another letter from Laurel. He considered shredding it like the others, but decided to read it this time. Dad, I know I've let you down. Every day I think about how I betrayed your trust, and I hate myself for it. Working these jobs has taught me what you tried to teach me all along, that hard work is the only way to build something real. I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize that. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day I can earn back your respect. Love, Laurel. Grant stared at the letter for a long time before folding it and placing it in his desk drawer. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he wasn't ready to give up on her entirely either. A new beginning. Standing by his window, the city lights glittering below, Grant raised his glass in a silent toast. He had lost a wife and a daughter to their own greed and selfishness, but he had gained clarity, strength, and freedom. For Grant, the betrayal had been a harsh reminder of life's truths. Trust must be earned, and integrity is non-negotiable. He had built his life on those principles, and he would continue to thrive because of them. As the night stretched before him, Grant knew one thing for certain: he would never allow anyone to take advantage of him again. Justice had been served, and the future was his to shape.